Mother bear freezes with her dying cub. The man opens the door, and something unbelievable happens. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. A mother's plea in the snow. The wind howled through the towering pines, carrying with it the sharp bite of winter. The once vibrant forest, painted in golden hues of autumn, had been consumed by a relentless cold, transforming the land into a frozen wilderness. Eleanor Whitmore, a retired wildlife researcher, had long learned to respect the rhythms of nature. Her solitary life in the cabin at the forest's edge had been a deliberate choice, a refuge from the noise of the world. But that night, something unsettled her. She was seated by the fire, wrapped in an old woolen blanket, when a sound cut through the wind. A low, desperate noise. Not the usual calls of the wild. It was something different. Something pleading. Her heart pounded as she rose to her feet, hesitating before stepping toward the frosted window. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Just beyond the glow of her porch light, standing motionless against the snow, was a massive black bear. But it wasn't alone. At its feet lay a small bundle of fur, barely moving. The cub. Eleanor's instinct screamed caution. She had spent a lifetime observing bears, learning their ways, understanding their boundaries. Approaching a mother bear, especially one in distress, was unthinkable, and yet, the look in the mother bear's eyes rooted her in place. It wasn't aggression, it wasn't a warning, it was something far rarer. Desperation. The great bear didn't move, her thick fur dusted with snow, her powerful frame frozen in place. Eleanor could see it in the way her body tensed, the way she stayed close but did not act. The cub at her feet trembled, its tiny chest barely rising and falling. Eleanor had seen sick animals before, but this was different. The cub was on the brink. She hesitated. Was this madness? What if the mother turned on her the moment she stepped outside? But the weight of the bear's silent plea crushed every ounce of doubt within her. Wrapping herself in a heavy coat, Eleanor inhaled deeply and unlatched the door. The bitter cold rushed in. She stepped onto the porch, her heart hammering. The mother bear tensed, her dark eyes locking onto Eleanor's every movement. For a brief electric moment, neither of them moved. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, Eleanor crouched, extending a hand toward the cub. It gave a weak, shuddering breath but did not flinch. The mother bear let out a low rumble, deep warning but not hostile. Eleanor met her gaze and held it. "I can help," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Time stretched unbearably thin. Then something happened that Eleanor would never forget. The mother bear stepped back. Not far, just a single step. A gesture so small, yet so profound. She was letting her. Eleanor wasted no time. Carefully, gently, she scooped the cub into her arms. It was far too light, its tiny body too cold. The mother bear gave a soft whimper, but did not intervene. With careful steps, Eleanor retreated into the cabin, leaving the door slightly ajar. The mother bear did not follow. She merely lowered herself onto the porch, her dark eyes never leaving Eleanor's. Inside, Eleanor worked quickly. She wrapped the cub in thick blankets, pressing warm water bottles around its frail body. She crushed medicinal herbs, mixing them into a liquid, and carefully dripped it between its tiny lips. The little one barely stirred. Outside, the mother bear let out a low, guttural sound, a sound Eleanor had never heard before. A mother's fear, a mother's grief. Eleanor's chest ached. She knew that pain too well. Hours passed. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and then a movement. The cub twitched, then gave a small, wheezing breath. Eleanor leaned in closer, hope blooming in her chest. Another breath, stronger this time. Then, a soft, trembling whimper. Eleanor exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She rose to her feet, stepping cautiously toward the door. The mother bear lifted her head immediately, her massive body tensed with expectation. Eleanor didn't need words. She slowly bent down, picking up the cub, now warmer, breathing steadier, and carried it to the door. She paused at the threshold. One last glance at the mother bear, then, with infinite gentleness, she placed the cub down onto the porch. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then, with the utmost care, the mother bear nudged her little one, sniffing it, assessing it. A deep, rumbling sound filled the air, a sound Eleanor could only describe as relief. The mother bear turned her gaze to Eleanor once more. It was brief, but in that fleeting moment, something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, a silent farewell. With a final huff, the mother bear scooped up her cub, holding it gently in her powerful jaws. Without another glance, she turned toward the trees, her large form disappearing into the swirling snow. Eleanor stood in the doorway long after they had gone, staring at the place where they had been. The wind was sharp, the cold biting, but something deep within her burned warm. She had never been one to believe in miracles, but that night, as the storm raged on, she was certain she had witnessed one. A mother's desperate journey. The blizzard showed no mercy. The once familiar forest was now an endless frozen expanse of white. Every tree, every fallen branch, and every path the mother bear had once known had disappeared beneath heavy drifts of snow. The biting wind howled through the pines, cutting through even the thickest fir. But the mother bear had no choice. She had to keep moving. Her cub, once a lively bundle of energy, tumbling through leaves and chasing her shadow, was now barely able to lift its head. It lay limply across her broad back, its tiny body unnaturally light. Each time she paused, nudging it gently, she was met with only the faintest stirrings of life. She had tried everything. She had dug for roots, but the ground was frozen solid. She had foraged for bark, but ice coated every surface. The hunt for small creatures had yielded nothing. She had given all she had to give, wrapping her cub in the warmth of her own body through the long nights, shielding it from the worst of the storm. But it wasn't enough. She needed help. And deep inside, though every instinct told her to avoid the scent of humans, she knew there was only one place left to go. She had seen the strange den before, the wooden one with the warm lights. It was a place she had always steered clear of, watching from the shadows. But now, as her cub trembled against her, barely breathing, her instincts battled against the reality before her. If she did nothing, her little one would not see another sunrise. She had no choice. With great effort, she rose to her feet, gripping her cub carefully in her jaws. Each step forward was agony. Her muscles burned, her body ached with exhaustion, and the snow swallowed her paws with every movement. Still, she pressed on. The wind carried with it the faint scent of smoke, warmth, safety, life. She followed it, step by agonizing step, through the trees and toward the wooden den she had observed from a distance many times before. As she emerged from the trees, her paws crunched against the snow-covered porch. The lights from inside flickered against the darkness, illuminating her weary form. For a long moment she stood there, her breath curling into the cold night air. Then, with the last of her strength, she raised one massive paw and dragged it across the wooden door. The sound was barely more than a whisper beneath the storm, but inside, movement stirred. Eleanor Whitmore had been sitting by the fire when the noise reached her ears. At first, she dismissed it as the wind, but then she heard it again, an unmistakable, deliberate sound, a scratching. Frowning, she stood up, wrapping herself in her thick wool coat. She moved cautiously to the window, her breath fogging against the cold glass. And then, her heart nearly stopped. There, standing in the dim light of her porch, was a bear. But it wasn't just any bear. It was a mother. And at her feet, nestled in the snow, was a cub barely clinging to life. Eleanor's fingers hovered over the latch. Every instinct screamed at her to stay inside, to not interfere. But another instinct, one deeper, more primal, urged her to act. She had spent years studying these creatures, learning their ways, understanding their fears, and never, not once, had she seen a mother bear approach a human dwelling willing. She wasn't here to attack. She was here to beg. With a deep breath, Eleanor unlatched the door and slowly, cautiously, stepped onto the porch. The mother bear tensed, but did not move. Their eyes met, and for a long, suspended moment, neither of them did anything. Then Eleanor knelt. She extended a careful, shaking hand toward the cub. It didn't move. She shifted her gaze back to the mother bear. "I can help," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. The mother bear remained still, but her breathing was heavy, ragged, almost pleading. Eleanor moved carefully, placing her hands beneath the cub's fragile body. The tiny creature was alarmingly cold. Too cold. She hesitated, waiting for the mother bear to react. But instead of aggression, the great beast let out a low, weary sound, one that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. A mother's helplessness. A mother's surrender. Cradling the cub in her arms, Eleanor turned and carried it inside. The warmth of the fire greeted her instantly, but she didn't pause. She grabbed blankets, wrapped the tiny bear, and moved swiftly to prepare a mixture of warm water and crushed herbs. Outside, the mother bear remained where she stood, watching through the half-open door. Eleanor could feel her presence, heavy, waiting, desperate. The cub barely stirred, its breath shallow, weak. Eleanor worked quickly, gently pressing a small amount of the warm liquid against its lips. For several moments, nothing happened. Then, a tiny twitch. A faint, fragile sound. A whimper. Eleanor exhaled sharply. She turned back toward the doorway, where the mother bear stood, her large body silhouetted against the snow. "It's not much," Eleanor murmured. She knew the night ahead would be long. She knew there were no guarantees. But as the fire crackled and the cub stirred in its blanket, she also knew one thing for certain. She would do everything she could, and she would not let them down. A mother's plea for survival. The wind howled through the trees, swirling thick snowflakes into the night as Eleanor Whitmore paced near her fireplace. The cabin was silent except for the occasional crackle of burning wood. Outside, the wilderness stretched in all directions, a frozen world of shadows and frost. Eleanor had lived in these mountains for over 2 decades, seeking solitude and purpose, but nothing in her years of experience had prepared her for what she was about to face. A sound reached her ears. Faint, deliberate, not the random creaking of branches in the wind. A scraping against the wooden porch. Something was out there. Her pulse quickened. Instinctively, she reached for the shotgun she kept beside the door. Peering through the frost-covered window, Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. A massive black bear stood on her porch, its dark silhouette nearly blending into the stormy night. But it wasn't just any bear. This one had something small at its feet, something barely moving. Eleanor leaned closer, heart pounding. A cub. It lay motionless, curled against its mother's legs, its tiny body almost buried in the thick snow that had gathered on the porch. Even from inside, Eleanor could see the ice clinging to the young bear's fur, its shallow breathing barely visible against the cold. Eleanor's grip on the shotgun tightened, but she didn't raise it. The mother bear wasn't attacking. She wasn't trying to force her way inside. She just stood there, watching Eleanor through the dim glow of the porch light. Her massive shoulders were hunched, her body visibly shaking, but her gaze was unwavering. It was a look Eleanor had seen before, once, a lifetime ago, when she had held her dying son in her arms, begging fate for mercy. The bear was asking for help. Eleanor's mind raced. Everything she knew about survival told her to stay inside to wait it out, but the longer she stood there, the more she realized she couldn't ignore the silent plea standing before her. With a deep breath, she set down the shotgun. Slowly, cautiously, she unlatched the door and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit her like a wall, but she barely noticed. The mother bear stiffened but didn't retreat. Her muscles tensed as Eleanor knelt beside the cub. It was too still, too cold. Eleanor reached out with trembling hands, pressing her fingers against the tiny chest. A heartbeat, weak but still there. She had seconds to make a choice. If she left the cub outside, it wouldn't survive the night. But if she took it inside, the mother bear might react unpredictably. Eleanor met the mother bear's eyes. "I need to take it inside," she whispered, though she knew the bear wouldn't understand her words. But somehow, she thought maybe, just maybe, it understood the intent. The mother bear let out a low, rumbling sound, a sound of reluctance, of desperation, of trust. Eleanor scooped up the cub, its small body barely heavier than a bundle of firewood. It didn't resist, too weak to protest. She turned and stepped backward toward the open door, her movements slow, deliberate. The mother bear let out another deep breath, watching her disappear inside. The fight for life inside, the warmth of the fire wrapped around Eleanor as she moved quickly, setting the cub on a pile of blankets near the hearth. She grabbed a dry towel, rubbing gently at the frost-covered fur, willing warmth back into the fragile body. The cub barely moved. Eleanor rushed to her cabinet, pulling down a small bottle of honey. It wasn't much, but it was something. Dipping her fingers into the golden liquid, she pressed a drop against the cub's lips. At first, nothing. Then, a faint flicker of movement. A small, weak lick. Eleanor exhaled sharply, relief flooding her chest. It was responding. A heavy shadow loomed at the door. The mother bear. She hadn't left. Eleanor hesitated, then, acting on instinct, she pulled the door open slightly, just enough for the bear to see inside. The mother let out a deep, rumbling sound, her breath fogging in the cold air. Her eyes darted between Eleanor and the cub, muscles shifting as if she were on the verge of stepping inside. Eleanor knew that wasn't an option, but she couldn't force the bear away either. Instead, she took a step back, leaving the door open just a little. The message was clear. I'm not taking your cub away. I'm helping. Slowly, the mother bear settled onto the porch, her massive body blocking the wind from entering. She wasn't leaving. She wasn't leaving. The long night, Eleanor worked through the night. She brewed a mix of warm water and medicinal herbs, carefully feeding small drops to the cub. She wrapped it in layers of blankets, checking its breathing every few minutes. Every time she glanced at the doorway, the mother bear was still there, watching, waiting. By dawn, the cub stirred, its breaths coming steadier, its tiny body shifting beneath the blankets. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned toward the doorway. She's going to be okay, she murmured. The mother bear let out a low, soft sound, not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. Relief. Eleanor knew she couldn't keep the cub inside forever. It was a wild creature, meant to return to the forest with its mother. But it wasn't strong enough yet. It needed time. For the next 3 days, Eleanor cared for the cub, bringing it to the threshold of the door each morning to show the mother bear it was still alive. She placed food outside for the mother, knowing she wouldn't leave while her cub was inside. And on the 4th morning, Eleanor knew it was time. She carried the cub to the doorway, kneeling as she set it down on the wooden planks. It took a moment, but then the cub moved. Not just a small shift, not just a flicker. It pushed itself onto its tiny legs and took a wobbly step toward its mother. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. The mother bear rose to her feet, her eyes locked on her cub. The cub let out a tiny, fragile sound, a call, and with careful, deliberate movements, the mother bear stepped forward, nudging her little one gently. Eleanor backed away. The mother bear looked at her one last time, holding her gaze with something Eleanor could only describe as gratitude. Then, with her cub at her side, She turned and disappeared into the trees. Eleanor stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where they had been. Then she smiled. She had spent years believing she was meant to be alone. But that night, those nights had changed something deep within her. She had saved a life. And in a way, perhaps, a life had saved her too. As the wind whispered through the trees, Eleanor whispered back, "Goodbye, my friends." And she knew, deep in her heart, that somewhere out in the wild, a mother bear and her cub were walking forward, stronger, together. A mother's promise. Eleanor Whitmore sat on her porch, wrapped in an old woolen shawl, watching the mother bear nudge her cub toward the tree line. It had been weeks since that desperate night when the mother had placed her dying cub at her doorstep. Now the little one was stronger, its once feeble steps turning confident, its eyes no longer dull with sickness but bright with renewed energy. Eleanor's heart swelled with emotions she couldn't quite name. Relief, pride, but also a quiet sadness. She had done what she set out to do, yet the thought of them leaving left her feeling strangely hollow. The mother bear turned her massive head, her deep, intelligent eyes locking onto Eleanor's for a long moment. A silent understanding passed between them. This was goodbye. Eleanor exhaled, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. Was it time? She had known from the start that this was temporary, that the wilderness called the mother bear and her cub home. But seeing them here, still lingering at the edge of the forest, made her wonder. Then, as if sensing her hesitation, the cub took a step forward, toward her. Eleanor's breath hitched as the young bear hesitated on its paws, glancing between its mother and Eleanor. For weeks, she had fed it, nursed it, kept it warm when the bitter cold had threatened to steal it away. Now, it seemed torn between two worlds. But the mother bear did not move. She did not rush her cub or demand it to follow. Instead, she watched, waiting. Eleanor knelt, extending her hand slightly, not to touch, but to reassure. "Go on, little one," she murmured, her voice thick. "She's waiting for you." The cub made a soft sound, a tiny chuff, before stepping back toward its mother. The moment stretched between them, fragile and profound, before the mother bear turned, leading her cub into the trees. Eleanor watched them disappear into the snowy forest, their dark forms blending with the shadows. And just like that, they were gone. A home left empty. The silence that followed was deeper than Eleanor expected. The porch, once filled with the sounds of the cub's playful movements and the mother bear's protective presence, now felt strangely empty. She sighed and pushed herself to her feet, her knees aching more than usual. The fire inside her cabin still crackled warmly, but it no longer seemed to hold the same comfort. Restless, she found herself wandering toward the small wooden bowl she had set out every morning for the cub. It was still there, resting in the snow, the last remnants of their time together. Eleanor had spent years living alone, convincing herself she preferred it that way. But something about this encounter had changed her. She had saved a life, and in doing so, she had been reminded of what it meant to care again. A lingering presence that night, as Eleanor lay in bed, the wind howled through the trees. She had nearly drifted off to sleep when a faint sound stirred her awake, a deep, distant chuff carried on the wind. She sat up, her heart pounding. Moving to the window, she squinted into the darkness. Nothing, just trees swaying against the moonlit sky. Yet something in her gut told her otherwise. Somewhere out there they were still watching over her just as she had watched over them. Eleanor smiled. She whispered into the night, "Be safe." And then, for the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. Lessons from the wilderness, a reflection on life and letting go. Life, much like the journey of the mother bear and her cub, is filled with unexpected challenges, moments of desperation, and acts of quiet resilience. In the depths of winter, when survival seemed impossible, the mother bear had to make an unthinkable choice: to seek help from a world she had always been taught to fear. But through that decision, she not only saved her cub's life but also discovered an unexpected connection with a human, a reminder that compassion knows no species, and that even the most unlikely bonds can bring about healing. This story mirrors the struggles we face in our own lives. There are times when we believe we must go it alone, that asking for help is a sign of weakness, or that trusting others carries too much risk. But what if, like the mother bear, our willingness to take a chance on kindness is what ultimately saves us? Too often, we resist vulnerability, fearing rejection or judgment, when in reality, our struggles are not meant to be faced in isolation. The mother bear's journey is a testament to the fact that strength is not just about endurance. It is about knowing when to seek help, when to trust, and when to let go. The cub's recovery under the care of a stranger is another powerful reminder of the transformative power of patience, dedication, and love. Healing, whether physical or emotional, takes time. Just as the cub took tentative steps back into strength, we too must allow ourselves the grace to heal at our own pace. Whether we are recovering from loss, illness, or emotional wounds, healing is a journey, not a destination. And sometimes, the hands that guide us through it are the most unexpected. But perhaps the greatest lesson of all comes at the end of the story. The moment when the mother bear knows it is time to leave. She does not linger out of fear or attachment. Instead, she understands that true love is not about holding on forever, but knowing when to let go. In life, we must all face moments of farewell, whether it is watching our children grow into independence, saying goodbye to loved ones, or stepping into a new chapter that feels uncertain. Letting go is one of the hardest things we do as humans, but it is also an act of deep love. It is a recognition that we have done our part, that we have given everything we could, and now it is time to trust that the ones we care for can stand on their own. As we navigate our own paths, this story reminds us to be like the mother bear, fiercely protective, endlessly resilient, and brave enough to trust in the kindness of others. And like the cub, we must embrace the moments when we are ready to step forward, to leave behind what once held us back, and to face the wilderness of life with newfound strength. Thank you for watching and for being part of this journey with us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. We'll see you.